If you've ever stood in Times Square getting elbowed by six different strangers or waited 40 minutes just to snap one photo without a stranger's backpack in it, you already know the feeling. New York gets sold to the world as one giant, loud, packed city, and honestly, that's only half true. There's another New York that most people never see because they never bother looking past the skyline. It's quieter. It moves slower. Nobody is rushing to catch a train, and nobody is filming a TikTok in front of you while you're trying to enjoy a sunset. These are the towns where the biggest crowd you'll deal with all day is a line of four people at a bakery. So if the idea of a packed boardwalk or a shoulder-to-shoulder hiking trail makes you want to stay home, stick around. We're counting down 10 New York towns built for people who'd rather have peace and quiet than a crowded photo op, and trust me, the best one is saving all its charm for the very end. Number 10, Hammondsport Finger Lakes. Hammondsport sits right on the southern tip of Cayuga Lake, and if you blink while driving through, you might miss the whole downtown. That's kind of the point. This is a town of about 500 people, which means most days you could probably name half the folks walking past the courthouse square. The lake itself curves in a Y shape unlike any other Finger Lake, and locals will tell you that shape alone changes the whole feel of the place. Calmer water, fewer boats, less noise bouncing off the hills. Wine lovers already know Hammondsport because it sits right along the Cayuga Lake wine trail. But here's the thing. Even during grape harvest season, this town never feels overrun the way some of the bigger wine towns do further south. You can walk into a tasting room on a Saturday afternoon and actually have a conversation with the person pouring your glass instead of shouting over a crowd. There's also a small aviation museum here honoring Glenn Curtiss, one of the earliest pioneers of flight, and it's the kind of quirky, low-key attraction that never makes it onto anyone's must-see list, which is exactly why it's worth a stop. Evenings in Hammondsport are almost absurdly peaceful. You can sit on a bench near the lake, watch the sun drop behind the hills, and hear nothing but water lapping against the docks. No traffic, no crowds pushing past you for a better angle. Just you, the lake, and maybe a couple of geese arguing over something in the shallows. If your idea of a good trip involves actual silence instead of ambient noise from 50 other tourists, Hammondsport earns its spot on this list without even trying too hard. Number 9. Ellicottville, Western New York. Tucked into the far western corner of the state, close enough to Pennsylvania that you could practically toss a rock across the border, Ellicottville has built a reputation as a ski town without ever turning into a ski circus. Winter brings snowboarders and skiers to the surrounding slopes, sure, but even then, the town itself stays walkable and relaxed instead of jammed with lift lines and traffic jams. What makes it different from other mountain towns is the way locals talk about summer here, almost more fondly than winter. Once the snow melts, the chairlifts keep running for hikers who want a shortcut to the summit views, and the whole pace of the town shifts into something closer to a laid-back mountain village than a resort destination. Main Street is lined with small, independently owned shops, the kind where the owner probably built the shelving themselves, and there's a noticeable absence of chain stores or big tourist traps trying to squeeze money out of every visitor. In July, the town throws a fireworks festival that pulls in a decent crowd for one single night, but blink and it's back to being sleepy again by the following morning. That's really the rhythm of Ellicottville, short bursts of activity followed by long stretches of calm. Because it sits so far from any major city, it never gets the casual day trip crowd the way towns closer to Buffalo or Rochester do. People who show up here are usually planning to stay a night or two, not squeeze in a quick selfie and leave. If you want mountain views without mountain traffic and a town that empties out again almost as fast as it fills up, Ellicottville deserves a real look. Number 8. Aurora, Cayuga Lake. Aurora might be one of the smallest towns on this entire list, and that's saying something considering everything else we've already covered. Sitting along the eastern shore of Cayuga Lake, this is a village built around history rather than tourism, and you can feel that difference the moment you walk down its main road. Wells College anchors the town, giving it a quiet academic energy without the chaos that usually comes with college towns, mostly because Wells has always stayed small and intimate rather than sprawling. What really sets Aurora apart is how untouched it feels compared to nearby lake towns that have leaned hard into tourism. There's no strip of souvenir shops here, no crowd of boats jockeying for dock space. Instead, you get restored 18th and 19th century buildings, several of which have been turned into inns, giving the whole village a preserved in time feeling without it coming across as fake or staged for visitors. Locals here take real pride in keeping things understated, and that shows in how few big commercial developments have made their way into town over the decades. Walking along the lakefront in the early evening, you'll likely see more herons than people, which tells you everything you need to know about how quiet this place stays, even during peak lake season. Aurora isn't the kind of town that tries to impress you with flashy attractions or big events. It's the kind of place that wins you over slowly through good food, calm water, and streets where you can actually hear birds instead of car horns. For anyone who wants historic charm without a single tour bus in sight, Aurora sits comfortably at number 8. Number 7, Lake Placid Adirondacks. Now, Lake Placid is a bit of an outlier on this list because it does pull in more visitors than the other towns we've talked about so far, largely thanks to its Olympic history from both 1932 and 1980. But here's why it still earns a spot. The crowds tend to cluster in very specific, predictable pockets, mainly around Main Street and the bobsled and ski jump attractions, while the rest of the town and surrounding lake area stays remarkably peaceful. If you time your visit outside of peak winter sports season or major holiday weekends, you'll find a completely different Lake Placid, one where you can hike Cobble Hill without passing more than a handful of people or paddle out onto Mirror Lake in near total silence. The surrounding Adirondack wilderness is massive, and most visitors never venture more than a mile or two off the main strip, which means the deeper trails and quieter coves remain almost empty even during busier months. There's something genuinely striking about being in a town with this much Olympic history and world-class scenery, yet still finding pockets of complete solitude within a short walk or paddle. Locals here have learned to navigate the seasonal rhythms, filling their calendars with quieter activities during shoulder seasons like early fall or late spring, when the tourist numbers drop, but the scenery stays just as spectacular. If you're willing to plan around the predictable crowd patterns instead of fighting through them, Lake Placid rewards you with genuine mountain solitude that most people assume doesn't exist in a town this well known. It takes a bit more strategy than some other spots on this list, but the payoff? Standing alone on a mountain overlook with nobody else in sight makes it more than worth the effort. Speaking of payoff, if you're the type who actually plans trips around avoiding crowds instead of just complaining about them afterward, drop a comment letting us know which of these towns you'd visit first. It genuinely helps us figure out which quiet corners of New York to cover next, and honestly, it's fun seeing which spots people gravitate toward. Number 6, Saranac Lake, Adirondacks. Saranac Lake carries a completely different energy than its more famous neighbor, Lake Placid, even though the two towns sit close enough together that people often confuse them. Where Lake Placid leans into its Olympic fame, Saranac Lake has quietly built its own identity around something much stranger and more charming: ice sculptures. Every February, the town spends 10 days building and celebrating around a hand-carved ice palace, a tradition that goes back over a century and pulls locals together far more than it pulls in outside tourists. Outside of that specific window, Saranac Lake settles into an almost sleepy rhythm, especially compared to the bigger Adirondack destinations nearby. The town sits on the edge of several small lakes, giving it more waterfront access per resident than almost anywhere else in the region. And because it's historically been a place people come to heal rather than to party, there's a certain calmness baked into its culture. Back in the early 1900s, this town became known as a health retreat for people recovering from tuberculosis, and that legacy of rest and recovery still shows up in how unhurried everything feels today. Locals walk their dogs along Lake Flower without dodging tourist crowds. Coffee shops stay quiet enough that you can actually hear the espresso machine over conversation. Even during summer, when the surrounding Adirondacks fill up with hikers chasing the high peaks, Saranac Lake itself stays relatively under the radar, mostly because visitors tend to treat it as a home base rather than a destination in its own right. That works out perfectly if you're someone who wants access to incredible mountain scenery without dealing with the crowds that gather around the more famous peaks and trailheads. Saranac Lake gives you all the beauty of the Adirondacks with almost none of the elbow-to-elbow hiking traffic. Number 5, Rhinebeck, Hudson Valley. Rhinebeck has this reputation for being one of the prettiest villages in the entire Hudson Valley, and honestly, the reputation is earned. Tree-lined streets, well-preserved historic buildings, and a walkable downtown that somehow avoids feeling like a tourist trap despite how frequently it shows up on best small towns lists. What keeps Rhinebeck from turning into a crowded weekend circus, the way some other Hudson Valley towns have, is its size and its distance from the nearest major highway exit. You have to actually want to come here. It's not really a spot you stumble into by accident on the way to somewhere else. The town has held onto a genuine year-round population that keeps local businesses running even when tourist numbers dip, which means the shops and restaurants aren't purely built around serving visitors. That balance matters more than people realize, because towns that depend entirely on tourism tend to feel hollow outside of peak season, while Rhinebeck stays lively and functional no matter the time of year. The Dutchess County Fairgrounds sit just outside town and host a handful of larger events throughout the year, but those crowds stay contained to fairground weekends rather than spilling into the village itself. Walk down the main strip on a random Tuesday afternoon, and you'll likely have entire blocks nearly to yourself, browsing bookstores and antique shops without anyone rushing you along. There's an old-world charm to Rhinebeck that feels earned rather than staged for Instagram. Buildings that have genuinely stood for 2 centuries, not recreations built to look historic. For anyone who wants that classic New England-style village experience without the classic New England-style crowds, Rhinebeck delivers exactly that, quietly and consistently, all year long. Number 4, Saugerties Catskills. Saugerties sits at this interesting crossing point where the Hudson River meets the edge of Catskill Park, giving it a kind of dual identity that most towns on this list don't have. On one side, you get rivertown charm, historic buildings, a lighthouse you can actually walk out to, and small town shops lining Main Street. On the other side, you're minutes away from serious hiking terrain, including the famous Breakneck Ridge Trail that draws hikers from across the region. What's interesting is how these two sides of Saugerties rarely collide in terms of crowd levels. The hiking trails can get busy on peak weekends, sure, but the actual town stays calm because most hikers arrive, park, hit the trail, and leave without spending much time wandering the village itself. That leaves the downtown area feeling distinctly separate from the tourist traffic generated by the trails, which is honestly a bit of a hidden advantage most visitors never think about. The Saugerties Lighthouse deserves a special mention here. It's one of the few lighthouses in the country you can actually stay overnight in, and reaching it requires a short walk along a causeway that floods with high tide, which naturally limits how many people bother making the trip. That built-in inconvenience keeps the lighthouse area peaceful even during busy tourist months. Beyond the lighthouse and trails, Saugerties has a solid local art scene, several galleries, and a farmer's market that feels more like a community gathering than a tourist attraction. The pace here rewards patience. This isn't a town built for quick day trips. It's built for people willing to slow down and actually explore both the riverside and the mountainside without rushing through either one. Number 3, Beacon, Hudson Valley. Beacon earned its reputation as one of the coolest small towns in the country years ago, largely thanks to Dia Beacon, a massive contemporary art museum housed inside a converted factory building right on the riverfront. That single museum transformed the entire town, pulling in artists, chefs, and creative types who slowly turned Main Street into one of the more interesting stretches of shops and restaurants in the whole Hudson Valley. Despite that reputation, Beacon has managed to avoid the trap that catches so many cool town destinations, becoming overrun to the point where the original charm gets buried under tourist infrastructure. Part of that comes down to geography. Beacon sits close enough to the city for a day trip on the train, but far enough that it doesn't attract the sheer volume of weekend traffic that closer towns deal with. Walking up Main Street on a weekday, you'll find galleries and independent shops with more employees inside than customers, giving you actual room to browse without feeling rushed or crowded. Mount Beacon looms over the town, offering a genuinely tough hike that rewards you with sweeping views of the Hudson River and the surrounding hills. And because the trail requires real effort, it naturally filters out casual visitors who aren't willing to put in the work. That filtering effect matters more than people realize when it comes to keeping a place from feeling overrun. Beacon has held onto its community feel even as it's gained outside attention, largely because the people who move here and the artists who show their work here actually care about keeping the town livable rather than turning it into a pure tourist product. If you want a genuinely creative, culturally rich town that somehow hasn't been ruined by its own popularity, Beacon sits comfortably at number 3. Before we get to the final two, if you're actually planning a trip based on this list, save this video now so you don't lose track of these towns later. Half the fun of exploring places like these is going in with a real plan instead of scrambling to remember names once you're already on the road. Number 2, Cooperstown, Central New York. Cooperstown might seem like an odd pick for a list about avoiding crowds, considering it's home to the Baseball Hall of Fame and pulls in hundreds of thousands of visitors every single year. But timing changes everything here. And once you understand the rhythm of this town, it becomes one of the more rewarding quiet escapes on this entire list. Outside of Induction Weekend, which happens once a year and genuinely does pack the town, Cooperstown settles into something much closer to a peaceful lakeside village than a tourist destination. The town sits right on the edge of Otsego Lake, and away from the Hall of Fame itself, you'll find quiet streets lined with historic homes, a genuinely excellent art museum in the Fenimore, and an opera house that hosts world-class performances without ever feeling packed or overwhelming. What makes Cooperstown work so well as a quiet destination is how contained the crowds actually are. Nearly everyone who visits comes specifically for baseball, which means they cluster almost entirely around one street and one building, leaving the rest of this genuinely beautiful town nearly untouched. Walk 2 blocks away from the Hall of Fame on any regular weekday, and you'll find yourself in a completely different Cooperstown, one where you can sit by the lake, grab a beer at a local brewery, and barely see another tourist. The surrounding countryside adds another layer of quiet appeal, rolling farmland and small farm stands that feel a world away from the baseball memorabilia. Shops just a short drive back toward downtown. Cooperstown proves that even towns with a massive singular attraction can still offer genuine peace and quiet, as long as you know how to navigate around the one thing everyone else is there for. Number 1, Skaneateles, Finger Lakes. And here we are, the town that ties this whole list together, Skaneateles, sitting at the northern tip of one of the cleanest, clearest lakes in the entire country. This is the kind of place that shows up on nearly every prettiest small town in America list. And for once, that reputation doesn't ruin the experience the way it usually does elsewhere. The lake itself is the star here. Water so clear, you can see straight down several feet, even from a public dock. And because the town has deliberately limited development along the shoreline, it stayed remarkably free of the crowded marina scene you'd expect from a lake this beautiful. Downtown Skaneateles feels almost frozen in a gentler era. Small boutiques, a classic movie theater, and restaurants that source ingredients from surrounding farms rather than trying to impress with flashy branding. What separates this town from every other spot on this list is the sheer consistency of its calm energy. There's no single event or attraction driving huge crowds here, no Ice Palace weekend, no baseball hall pulling in bus tours. Instead, Skaneateles built its reputation slowly, through word of mouth about how genuinely relaxing it feels to just exist here for a few days. Locals take real pride in keeping things low-key, resisting the kind of commercial development that turns charming lake towns into crowded tourist strips. Sitting by the water in the early morning, watching mist roll off the lake before anyone else is awake, you start to understand why people keep coming back to this specific town year after year instead of chasing the next trendy destination. It's not flashy, it's not loud, and it doesn't try particularly hard to impress anyone. It just quietly does everything right: clean water, good food, friendly people, and an almost total absence of the crowds you'd expect from a town this beautiful. If you only visit one place from this entire list, make it Skaneateles and go early in the morning if you really want to understand why it earned the top spot. So that's the list: 10 towns across New York where you can actually breathe, slow down, and enjoy yourself without fighting through crowds just to see something beautiful. If this kind of quiet, crowd free travel content is your thing, stick around and subscribe, because there are plenty more towns like these scattered across this state that most people never think to visit. Let us know in the comments which one of these 10 you're planning to check out first. And if you've already been to any of them, share what made it worth the trip. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.